Hello everyone! Today I want to kind of improvise a video talking about introversion and extroversion and typing and how I decide if someone's introverted or extroverted. A little while ago I talked about making a part 2 video for the video about extrovert sensing, which I am also working on that video, but it's gonna be a long one. And I apologize for not uploading for like 5 years. So yeah, let's talk about introversion, extroversion. I also just wanna discuss this a little bit because I thought it's an interesting topic and give some examples from my own life. So I noticed that in the past I used to kind of think about introversion and extroversion. Like I really focused on how much do they talk to people, how much do they seem like they're outgoing, right? But I have kind of learned that, at least if you ask me, it can make things a little bit confusing when you're dealing with people who seem a bit more ambiverted, to really decide are they introverted or extroverted, because sometimes people really do seem quite ambiverted. It can be really hard to figure it out. And in that case, it can also be really hard to figure out their type. So I don't really look that much anymore at how much do they seem like they're outgoing, because even though I think it is true, it's like, yes, introversion and extroversion has a lot to do. In the end, what becomes your preference has a lot to do with where do you get energy from? Do you get energy from being in your head, or do you get energy from engaging with the world around you, right? Yeah, what makes you feel tired if you do it for too long? Yeah, I think sometimes it can get a bit confusing, because sometimes people can also want to do things or be motivated to do certain things even if it doesn't give them a lot of energy. For example, for me, I value spending time with friends and family. So I wouldn't, if they ask me to go somewhere, I wouldn't say no. Even if at the end of the day I might get really tired, and at some point I'd have no choice and I'd have to say something like, okay, I'm tired, I need to be alone right now, right? But usually up to that point nowadays, I don't avoid being extroverted like how I used to maybe 5 years ago or something. Because I know that that's not what I want with my life, right? I don't want to avoid it. So sometimes people can want things even when you can want to go out even when you're an introvert, right? And the other way around. In the end, it's also the most healthy to be more balanced. So it can be a bit difficult. I personally think that real ambiverts don't exist. I think that everyone has one function that they prefer the most. And nowadays, that's just how I type people. And I don't know if that's the best way to decide introversion and extroversion, but it's a way to do it. And for me, it's, I don't know, I think it works well. You could ask people, but sometimes people don't. Sometimes it's also hard to really understand yourself, I think, especially when you're an ambivert. I'm not an ambivert, but I know some people who seem like they are. I've had people, for example, tell me that they think they're introverted, when in the end, I personally still think that they're an extrovert because of the function they seem to prefer, right? That doesn't mean that they are necessarily. It just means that I still believe that it's most likely that they are. You can never know for sure, right? It's, in the end, it's just a theory, but I still think that sometimes people who are ambiverted also may not really know what they are, right? So I thought it would be fun to just give you a few examples from my own life, like people I've known. I'm just gonna talk about their type and how I noticed that they preferred a certain function over another function, right? I don't know if it's a good idea to type people out, but I don't go around telling people oh, this is your type and that's a fact or something, It's I just think it's fun. I literally type people without thinking nowadays. It just happens, you know, my mind just goes like, oh, they're this type, you know. I just can't stop it from happening because I think it's fun. So I do it anyway. And I use it to understand my friends and family and just anyone I know. I use it to try to understand them better and try to respect them more and try to understand how they experience life and their point of view and try to understand our differences better. So that's why I always do type people. So yeah, let's just talk about this. Just some examples what I've seen. So let's talk about ISFP. The reason why I want to talk about ISFP is because this is, first of all, this is a type that, in my opinion, is very common. I know a lot of ISFPs. That doesn't mean they're all the same. I know ISFPs that I don't get along with, like, at all. For some reason, I also know ISFPs that I've been good friends with because we're all people, and just because you're a certain type doesn't necessarily mean that you get along. The reason why they can be a bit confusing with introversion and extroversion is because their second function is extrovert sensing, and their first function is introverted feeling, which means that they are introverts, but they can seem a bit extroverted because extrovert sensing. So extrovert sensing is the function that's very good at, like, being focused on your surroundings, being in the moment, interacting with people, you know. So even an introvert who uses extrovert sensing a lot can seem a bit more extroverted. Apart from that, their first function is introvert feeling, which on the one hand, yes, it makes us people pretty independent, because introverted feeling is kind of a function where it's like, I'm focused on my own identity, so I'm gonna do what I want. But because it's feeling, these people usually really value relationships with other people. They usually don't really enjoy being alone. They just won't compromise. You know, they're not gonna change for other people. They're always gonna be themselves, but they want relationships with people. They're usually very social. So that can also make them seem a bit more extroverted. So let's compare them to their extroverted counterpart, which is the ESFP. I've met a lot of ESFPs where it's like obvious that they're extroverts, right? But I've also met like one who was a bit more ambiverted. Let's talk about the ISFPs who I thought were maybe extroverts, and the ESFP who I thought was maybe an introvert, and why in the end I decide that they're not, right? So we're gonna look at what function do they prefer. For example, I met someone who seemed very outgoing. This person was like, I have a lot of hobbies, I have a lot of friends. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of ISFPs have a lot of friends for some reason. I know another one who also has that. Like, what makes me think that this person was an introvert? It's like, I just see introverted feeling all the time, right? It's like, you need to think for yourself, what function am I looking at? What function am I seeing? So this person was constantly talking about their own opinion. Like, introvert feeling is very self-centered. They had very strong emotions too. They were very emotion focused. And you can also just try to see what's the function that they don't like to use. And if you're dealing with an ISFP, that's extrovert thinking. So these people don't enjoy putting their emotions away and trying to be more objective, trying to be more logical, and they prefer to talk like, oh, I love this, or I hate this so much, or like just constantly making value judgments, right? And they really like socializing because their dominant function is feeling, you know? But the way you can tell they're introverted is because introverted feeling, extroverted feeling looks very different. So these people don't enjoy using extroverted thinking, which means usually they don't enjoy organizing things. They don't enjoy telling people like, oh, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. Like, they usually kind of are laid back. They enjoy sharing their opinions, but they don't enjoy making a plan or like organizing things, right? That's different. So they are usually a bit passive in a way. And they're just very concerned with their own identity. And when I keep seeing that, like I see introverted feeling, I keep seeing this function, then I'm like, okay, even if they use their extroverted sensing a lot and they are very comfortable using it, you can still see that they prefer introverted feeling because that's the function I keep seeing from them, right? And they don't enjoy using extrovert thinking. Also, another ISFP, I knew another ISFP who talked a lot. So that's definitely dangerous, right? If someone talks a lot, you might think, okay, they must be extroverted, right? Because otherwise, why they talk a lot? But I was still having this strong feeling that this person is introverted for some reason, for the same reasons, right? Because I didn't see extroverted sensing more than introverted feeling. I kept seeing introverted feeling. Introverted feeling definitely enjoys socializing as well. They talked a lot, but you could still see introverted feeling. They were very concerned with their own identity. They have very strong opinions. They were very emotional. You could see a lot of emotion in their eyes, like all the time, in their like everything. That's also a big sign where I kept thinking, I see introvert feeling all the time, right? And they were kind of insecure about their extrovert thinking. So another interesting thing is that you might see that people are kind of insecure about their inferior function. They might try to use it, but not all the time. They might be afraid to use it all the time because they're kind of not very confident about it, right? So this person would sometimes try to use extroverted thinking, but in the end, they would not be very confident in actually like making a plan, and they would prefer if someone else does it, right? And they'd still be more passive most of the time. And I still don't know if they're actually an introvert, but that's when I think, okay, I keep seeing introvert feelings, so I'm just gonna say that they're an introvert. Also, another ISFP. What's interesting is like, I think this person, also people will mistake her for being an extrovert. This person who people would also maybe say like that she's an extrovert because she was so social, but they really enjoy retreating sometimes. Since they love using extrovert sensing, they don't always retreat inside, they can retreat outside. So you need to remember that about ISFPs and maybe about extrovert sensing. They might enjoy like being with their own thoughts, but they might enjoy being outside and still engaging in a sort of activity at the same time so that they can still kind of engage their second function as well. So I know ISFPs who enjoy sports, who enjoy just being outside and just they can enjoy being alone outside, being with animals, so that they can still engage their extrovert sensing while being alone, while just being outside on their own or maybe with animals. So when we're looking at the ESFP, the real difference is I felt like I was seeing extrovert sensing more in them. They would also be shy. Like those people are usually at the same time they seem very social. At the same time they also seem kind of shy. So this person seemed pretty shy, but at the same time very social too. So the difference is I saw introverted feeling. I saw there's a lot of personality, like they didn't want to change for other people necessarily. They had their own identity. They were emotional, but you could just see that their introvert feeling was not their main focus because they were more focused on interacting with the world around them. Introvert feelers are more focused on their own judgments, like how am I feeling? So like while they're doing something, their own judgments are still pretty much at the forefront of their mind. But for an ESFP, it's a bit more like they're engaging with the world around them is the most important. So I saw this person was always wanted to talk to someone, even when they were shy and they were maybe kind of afraid to do it, they were still trying to engage with the world around them. They were trying to talk to people. They were trying to walk around. Usually ESFPs, you can recognize them a bit because they can't sit still for a long time. It's kind of difficult for them. They love like just moving around. So this person kept wanting to move around, wanting to talk to people. This person just became extremely social because they were constantly like SEFI and they didn't really want to use TE and I a lot. So you'll notice compared to an ISFP, ISFPs, they are stubborn. You know, ISFPs, sometimes they will lie about it. You know, sometimes they don't like conflict. So they'll be like, pretend to agree with you while you can literally notice, or I would notice that they're probably lying, you know. And ESFPs, they can sometimes seem a bit more naive. Or not necessarily naive, just also more, it depends, also more social. You know, it depends on how you look at it, of course. Where they are more accepting of other people's opinions and experiences and their own, and like less stubborn. Because you can also look at the stubborn people as more like antisocial, right? It all depends on how you look at it. I personally think every type balances each other out. You know, it's good that we have all of them. They all balance each other out. They all have their own value to bring, lessons that we can learn from them. So that's one thing that was kind of missing. They also didn't seem to be too passive. You know, some ISFPs can seem, it depends. They can seem a little bit afraid of taking the lead. And ESFPs are less like that. They're less afraid of taking the lead. When I say that, like taking the lead, just remember extrovert thinking, extrovert feeling, right? Because those are the outward, like, organizing functions. So those are kind of the leading functions. So yeah, let's move on to ESTJ. I've known an ESTJ who I thought was an introvert for a long time. And I think this is a thing with extroverted thinking as a function where it's one of those functions that can be confused a little bit for not being very extroverted, because extroversion is kind of associated with like loving to be around people, to talk to people a lot, to be very social, to be very outgoing. But when you think about the like social outgoing people, they would be much more likely to be an ESFP or even an ENFJ than an ESTJ. You know, even though an ESTJ is also extroverted. So I thought this person was an introvert for a long time, and then eventually realized that I think they're an extrovert, but they're probably an ambivert too. So the thing is, extroverted thinking doesn't have to look like being very outgoing. Extroverted thinking is more so about, it's about enjoying like completing tasks that they see as something that they have to do. When you think about extrovert thinking and extrovert feeling, these people just love kind of organizing and getting things done and making plans, executing plans. So an extroverted thinker could literally just all day be like maybe working on something that they wanted to achieve. For example, a goal they had. For example, I want to get a job and I am going to have to do all this for it. Like just focusing on what they're trying to achieve and all the things they would have to do for it. And they could literally just be working, or like maybe imagine they're a scientist and it's their job to write a paper, like they could just trying to be collecting all the information, maybe from the outside world, to be able to write this paper. And they could be really busy doing that because that's interests them. They enjoy solving problems because they lead with a thinking function. They enjoy figuring out this problem and then writing a paper about it, right? But even still, they could be engaging with the world around them while doing it, and still maybe they don't seem outgoing because they're not partying all the time. They're busy with their own goals, but they might not be at parties, they might not be socializing, they might not be talking to people necessarily, right? They might even just be working, and then it might seem like they're not very outgoing, but they're still extroverts, right? Because they still engage with their extroverted thinking function. They're not stuck in their head, they're focused on the world around them, they're just not necessarily focused on people very much. So yeah, I just want to say, like, ESTJs definitely can be, I don't know about ENTJs, but definitely ESTJs can seem like they're introverts, especially when they're more ambiverted. So how do you notice that they're an ESTJ and not like an ISTJ, right? Looking at functions again, you can definitely notice when someone uses introverted sensing as their dominant function. People who use introverted sensing as their dominant function are usually they can also seem ambiverted, which makes it even more confusing because, for example, both ESTJ and ISTJ are very social people. ISTJs, they are going to try their best to be social because community is usually very important to them. Same with ESTJs, healthy ESTJs, I want to say, because I know that there's some bad stereotypes about ESTJs being like this kind of these mean people who are like imagine a boss who's like kind of mean. In reality, I think those figures are not how most ESTJs are that are healthy. Imagine a male ESTJ who is just unhealthy and never learned to develop their feeling whatsoever, right? Because in society, it's just that men are less encouraged to develop their feeling, whereas women are more expected to develop their feeling function, right? So I imagine not that female ESTJs could not be unhealthy, of course they could be, but like I think male ESTJs have a higher chance of becoming unhealthy. Imagine someone like that, like yes, they could turn into this bad stereotype, but in reality a lot of ESTJs are very community oriented, kind people, as long as they don't neglect their feeling function too much. What was I even talking about? So ISTJs, ESTJs, right? Okay. So one thing that's very obvious is like how emotional are these people, because ISTJs are definitely more emotional. One thing you need to watch out for is ESTJs. They can pretend to be emotional, which is really funny because they're extroverts, you know? You know this thing? They are both extroverts, they are also community oriented. They usually feel more safe in a group, which means that they are gonna be looking around them and looking at all these people, especially the women, I noticed. Especially the women, ESTJs, they look at other people and other women and they're like thinking, okay, it seems like people expect me to act emotional, even though they're not naturally very emotional, right? What they're gonna be doing is they're gonna pretend to be emotional and they're going to mimic it, right? They're going to be more animated in their face or like their expressions and stuff because they think it's expected of them rather than actually feeling those emotions, right? So, but in the end, you can notice that ESTJs are definitely less emotional. They're more rational. They are more serious, right, than ISTJs are. But it can be difficult to see because ISTJs, even though they are more emotional, They're also introverted, so of course they're gonna be hiding it a lot, right? They're not gonna be very expressive with it. But it's definitely easier for them to reach their emotions. So, yeah, how do you know? Like, okay, ESTJs, they care more about certain goals they have set for themselves in their mind. They usually care a lot about efficiency and that kind of stuff. They also care about community because it's their second function. It's introverted sensing. They care about their past, they care about their community, but it usually comes second. Whereas for the ISTJ, it will be more difficult for them to reach their intuition. So what I notice about SI is it's a very kind of laid back function because it's an introverted perceiving function. So it's looking at your own internal world of images, basically. So ISTJs and ISFJs are usually very calm people, whereas ESTJs can kind of seem a little bit on edge. Like they want to organize, they want to have a plan, they want to solve problems that come up, right? So they seem a bit more on edge. They seem a bit more like they are going to be taking the lead. Whereas ISTJs, ISFJs are very laid back, very calm usually. They can take the lead, but they will only do it when like someone else doesn't do it. Basically, like they're still more likely to be more calm, and like their first function is more community and more thoughtful. So they definitely enjoy just kind of looking through their own thoughts of the world and focusing on their own community. So yeah, they might have a bit more trouble with intuitive conversations, with getting out of their comfort zone than the ESTJs, whereas the ESTJs have more difficulty with more emotional conversations. So let's move on to the ENFJs. So I knew two ENFJs who actually, I'm pretty sure they have both said at some point that they thought they were introverted. And I'm pretty sure they're ENFJ, so that's interesting, right? But I noticed huge differences between me and them. And I think it has to do with the function preferences. So I think one reason that, for example, ENFJ and maybe the same thing with an ENTJ, I don't know, can seem a bit more introverted is because their sensing function is relatively weak. They are intuitives, but they also taking in new information is a bit difficult for them because they do it with extrovert sensing, but that's their third function. So, for example, an ENFP, they're also an intuitive, but it would be a lot easier to take in, or an ENTP, it would be a lot easier to take in new information. They don't get overwhelmed by too much new information, whereas an ENFJ would. And besides that, they also get overwhelmed by sensing. So I think that's maybe one reason why I noticed some ENFJs, they get exhausted pretty easily for some reason. I mean, I have the same problem, but I'm an introvert, so it's like, yeah, obviously. But for an ENFJ, it's like, why do they have that problem when they're an extrovert? Doesn't make a lot of sense. I think here probably the main problem is that they don't necessarily get energized by doing a lot of new things or taking in a lot of new information. They get energized by people mostly, and kind of like making plans, organizing. So they are very much focused on people. Their life usually revolves around their friends, their family, their passions. But it can be difficult to know if someone's an ENFJ or an INFJ because INFJs can seem the same way. It's just that INFJs are less emotional. Like NI wants to understand, right? It wants to understand the big picture, the connections between things. And TI kind of wants to do the same thing and wants to understand how things work. So INFJs can be a bit more seeming like they just want to understand the world and how it works. Whereas ENFJs, their main focus is going to be the people and their passions, much more than like knowledge or understanding. And they will struggle with introverted thinking. They will struggle with letting go of their emotion. Whereas INFJs struggle more with taking in new information, with being more outgoing. I know several ENFJs, so I look at them and I'm like, hey, what are you doing, right? And I keep seeing extrovert feeling, right? Extrovert feeling. I was gonna stop filming, but I was just thinking about something else. So I was thinking, I know an ENTP who seems pretty extroverted, but I also know an ENTP who I was kind of confused about. Like, are they an introvert? So I was thinking maybe I can also talk about that a little bit. Because to me, it's like, if they were an introvert, like, what type would they be? Like, I should know. And then there was no possibility for a type they could be. Like, they couldn't be thinking dominant because I saw extroverted feeling all the time, or at least feeling, right? So sometimes people with dominant extroverted intuition can also seem more introverted, because how do they engage with the world around them? Usually it's through their ideas. So they'll just be, I have this idea, and like they'll just be sharing their thoughts. They keep getting ideas all the time. Like they're like, oh, imagine this, imagine that, right? And they can just engage with the world literally just through talking without even having to go anywhere. It can make them seem like maybe they're introverts because they seem a little bit in their head, right? Especially ENTPs, because they use introvert thinking. So they can seem a bit analytical. And it depends though, because I know one of them who's very outgoing. I know another one who's more ambiverted, right? Who is not that outgoing, but you can still see that the main interests of an ENTP is like understanding the world, going out, experiencing new things, and then learning from it, that kind of stuff. But they can still be shy people, and that's how things sometimes get confusing. So that's kind of how I type people. I just thought it would be interesting to talk about that for a video. And I have a lot of things, a lot of ideas, a lot of things coming up. I'm sorry that it's taking so long. I'm really happy when you guys still watch my videos, and I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.